بتنحت اللي العين شايفاه، دقات فيها نبض فنان، فكرة بتتزخرف من رسمة في خيال، إبرة بتطرز فن عرفناه، إيد بتنقش تراث ورثناه، أباً عن جد اتعلمناه. مواهب مصرية كتير بتعبر عن نفسها بالفن الحرفي والتراثي بمشغولات أبهرت العالم، معمولة بإيدين فنانين وحرفيين من مصر كلها. تحف مش هتلاقيها في مكان تاني غير في معرض تراثنا، مكان واحد فنون من كل حتة في مصر تحت رعاية السيد الرئيس عبد الفتاح السيسي رئيس الجمهورية. معرض تراثنا من 9 ل 15 أكتوبر في مركز مصر للمعارض الدولية التجمع الخامس.
The name Tebirenbet means the beginning of the new year or the starting day of the year. It also means the first day of the first month of the flood. The literary name is the New Year's Eve or the first of the year. The new year starts in the Egyptian calendar with the beginning of the arrival of the flood to an important area called the shore of Habi, who is the Nile god. It lies in between Heliopolis or Ain Shams and Memphis in the north of Egypt, known today as Athar al-Nabi. It's connected to the appearance of the doggy star known as Cyrus to foretell the beginning of the flood. That's why the ancient Egyptians called it the bringer of the flood. The beginning of its appearance over the east horizon was in the days between the 17th and the 19th of July. The beginning of this year starts in the night which precedes the new year, when a group of the senior priests led by the high priest, who replaces the king in the performance of rituals, start their performance. There are 4 principal priests in the temple, in addition to the priest related to Dendera city, who is called the music player. This group marches towards the chapel existing at the extreme of the southern wall, which is called the House of Flames. They start descending to the cellar, where they reach the first chamber, which comprises a chapel with a statue of goddess Hathor, taking the form of a bird with a human head made of gold or gilded wood, where they perform some rituals. Then they carry the statue from the cellar up to the House of the Flames, where a group of flags carriers are waiting. The procession starts to move towards the pure room, where a group of rituals called the arrangement of crowns occur, in which the goddess gets 8 different crowns from El Ashmonain, in addition to a big collection of jewelry and fabrics. Then she's subjected to being perfumed and purified with incense. Amongst the rituals performed in the celebration of the beginning of the new year in ancient Egypt is a ritual of placing all sorts of food over the tables. This food includes the bread and the desserts and complete animals and birds and perfumes and bouquet of flower. In addition to some private tools of goddess Hathor, like the sistrum and the golden crown and the wine jar presented in the wine festival. Then the procession of the priests ascends to the ceiling of the temple by using the stairs, where we see the sequence of the flags bearers and priests wearing the mask of goddess Hathor and carry offerings, preceded by the king and the queen, and reciting the songs accompanying the feast. Upon arrival to the ceiling of the temple, the statue is placed in the chapel dedicated to it, which columns take the Hathoric shape, or the shape of goddess Pat connected to Hathor. Around the chapel the offerings are placed, and then the most important event happens, which is the unification with the sun disk, which happens when the early rays of the sun rises on the first day of the new year. As for the festival of putting the foundation stone of the temple, the king leaves his palace with the flags carriers to go to the location of the temple held by goddess Seshat, where he puts wedges to mark the boundaries of the temple to the ground. Then he joins between them with ropes and starts to dig the ground and then draw the boundaries of the temple. Thebes and the grand temples in it, especially Karnak and Luxor temples, are situated on the east bank of the Nile, while the west bank has witnessed in the New Kingdom a vast development for the city of the dead. Starting from the New Kingdom, and precisely the 18th dynasty, the kings deserted building pyramids in Memphis Cemetery, and they took the mountains of western Thebes and the Valley of the Kings, an eternal resting place for themselves. They were followed by their successors of kings until the end of the 20th dynasty. The style of the royal tomb became different consequently, for the place of burial according to the new method was composed of a hole dug under the ground, cut out in the rocky hills of the Valley of the Kings. It became completely separate from the rituals of presenting important offerings, which place then became a temple, erected alone beside the valley by the edge of the desert. It's easy to explain that scientifically, for the tombs of the Valley of the Kings were more difficult for the tombs robbers and became perfectly safe in their new location, which was secretly hidden to a great extent. In addition to the natural protection supplied by the Theban hills surrounding the valley. This scientific explanation was not the first motive behind this change, but it was the evolution that happened in the religious creeds concerning the rising of the star of god Ammon and the death of the star of the sun creed, represented in god Ra. The relation between the king and the deity was the most important purpose which determined the change in the location and style of the tombs in the New Kingdom. For the worship of the body of the king and his statue was expressed in that huge form of the pyramid. Pointing to the cult of the sun was eliminated to the open court that was included within the funerary temples of the kings of the New Kingdom, and which became a declaration of the centralization of Ammon. In spite of the fact that these temples were always mentioned as being royal funeral temples, but in reality they were dedicated to a specific image of god Ammon's images, with whom the king became merged after his death, through the existence of the king's statues within their chapels, after that event used to happen during his life by his actual visit to the temple. It's a fact that each and every funerary temple was a temple of god Ammon, taken by the statue of the deceased king as a residence for itself. This is clarified through the structure of the temples, which remained in a good condition, and which dates to the age of the 19th and 20th dynasties. They are the temples of Seti I in El Gorna and the temples of Ramesses II, especially the one called the Ramesseum, and the temple of Ramesses III in Habu City, where the middle and rear rooms were the most sacred places of the temple and were consecrated for the cult of Ammon, not only in the image of a statue placed for always for him in them, but also for his sacred boat, placed inside a chapel consecrated to it. Goddess Ma'at has appeared since the middle of the Old Kingdom in a perfect female form, wearing a tight dress and wearing above her head her prominent distinguishing feature, the ostrich feather, which is shared by the air god Shu. But her name started to appear by the beginning of dynasties. The name of the goddess is written by the ideogram of a base, which is the foundation over which something is based, like a throne or a statue, and is a symbol of stability when justice is applied on earth. Ma'at was pictured in a human form, and just like the feather was placed over her head as a mark, it was used as an ideogram in her name, and probably that feather was used by the Egyptians in art and writing when they thought of Ma'at as a goddess. The feather could represent the metaphysical level of El-Ma'at and the cosmic symbol that represents the celestial origin of the idea of justice. It's noticeable her sisterhood to God Shu, who is also represented with the feather. Ma'at was acknowledged during creation, when the sun rose for the first time, and thus she was called the daughter of Ra. Her stay confirms the continuity of existence as it was in the beginning of time. The relation between Ma'at and Ra appeared since the pyramids texts, for the king was asked to expel the wrong and to make El-Ma'at his successor after Ra, for the king represents Ma'at in front of Ra in the New Year's festivals. Goddess Ma'at was connected to God Osiris, who became at the end of the Old Kingdom era a judge for the dead, and on his hands the judgment of the dead happened according to the coffin's texts. Goddess Ma'at had her own priesthood since the Old Kingdom era, for more than 29 persons carried the title of the priests of Ma'at in the reliefs of the private tombs during the Old Kingdom period. 3 of these priests were ministers. As for the rest, they worked in the administration of judgment. It's noticed that among the titles of the judges, there is always a title of the priest of Ma'at, and that's for the job connection with stating and applying justice. In spite of the fact that the text points to the priests of Ma'at with the titles of Web and Heri and Khebet and Neterhem, yet nothing is known of the rituals of the cult of that goddess. It's possible that the title of the supervisor of the possessions of Ma'at suggests that there were lands consecrated to her temple, but not much is known about its jurisdiction or administration, and according to the coffin's texts, there wasn't a special place dedicated to her cult, and not a single temple was found that belonged to her priests until the beginning of the New Kingdom. The kings of the New Kingdom showed a great interest in building religious buildings for her as stated in Thutmose III texts. A temple for her was built in the north of Karnak by King Amun-Hotep III, and it seems that such religious buildings are the ones referred to as Set-Mait, or the place of truth, and stated that goddess Mait resides in them. Nevertheless, Mait as a cosmic goddess didn't have her special temple, but she was revered in the other great temples and in all occasions, just like all the other cosmic deities. The Djed pillar is one of the hieroglyphic signs that enjoyed symbolic creeds and important amulets, for it was connected with god Ptah and Osiris and Anjiti, and known to be a symbol of stability and continuity and revival and resurrection of Osiris. The symbol of Djed is known in the Egyptian writing since the pyramid texts, and was known as a symbol and a column that was carried in the religious celebrations, and also as an amulet to protect its carrier. The Djed column played a great role in the royal and daily and religiously and funerary lives, and it was amongst the preferable decorations in constructions and furniture and jewelry, and it appeared in the makeup tools as a religious symbol with significant hints. The Djed was used in the daily use tools together with other signs like Ankh and Was. It was also tightly connected with the symbol of Tet in the decorations of temples and beds and coffins and chapels, like those of King Tutankhamun. The early beginnings of the appearance of the Djed symbol goes to the prehistoric ages. It has kept its place and sanctity until after the end of the ages of the ancient history, when the ancient Egyptians used it as one of their most famous symbols and the oldest prototype ever found. There were two prototypes made of ivory found by Zaki Saad in one of the tombs of Izbet el-Walda in Helwan, and he dated them back to the first dynasty. The artist has made them so perfectly to reflect their sanctity, which suggests that the cult was known since the first dynasty and may have started a long time before it. So since the two pillars were done so perfectly by their maker, thus it's concluded that they were not invented by the first dynasty, and they point to the roots of the Osirid religion since the prehistoric period. The feast of Obit was known as Heb Nefer in Ebit, which means the great feast in Ebit, and it was one of the most important feasts of god Amun in Thebes. It was celebrated as an annual festival in the second month of the flood festival. There are no available information about that feast and its ritual before the era of the New Kingdom, for it seems that celebrating it started in the reign of Thutmose III, when celebrations continued for 11 days. This celebration continued during the time of Ramesses III for 24 days, until it reached 27 days. In that festival, god Amun visited his temple in Luxor, starting from his temple in Karnak, in a mighty procession. The journey used the overland road headed south during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut, while the return trip to Karnak took the river path. The land road of Luxor temple was supplied with 6 chapels for the rest of the god's procession. Since the reign of King Tutankhamun, both the trips of going to Luxor temple and coming back from it happened across the river. Each and every member of the triad of god Amun, who are his wife Mut and their son Khonsu, had a river boat dedicated to him and a private chapel. The essence of that festival was a long walk of a procession thus concerned with the family sacred triad of Thebes, Amun, Mut and Khonsu. The reliefs of the walls of the court of King Amun-Hotep III in Luxor Temple showed how the Opet festival is celebrated, as well as the texts that were executed during the reign of King Tutankhamun and were usurped by King Hor-Imheb.
قسما بالله، أنا بقسم بالله اللي اتعمل فيك يا مصر ما يتعمل في 20-30 سنة.
هنشيل بلدنا على كتافنا، مش هنسيبها ولا هنضيعها. هفضل أبني وأعمر فيها لغاية لما تنتهي يا حياتي يا مدتي.